Hello, my name is Ben Welsh, and I'm going to be telling you guys why I think Kobe Bryant had a better game than Wilt Chamberlain. So, on March 2nd, 1962, a man named Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points against the New York Knicks and broke the NBA single game scoring record. This feat has held the record since and probably will never be broken. However, 44 years later, a man named Kobe Bryant scored 81 points on January 2nd, 2006 against the Toronto Raptors. Now, at first glance, it looks like Chamberlain had a better game by scoring 100 points compared to Kobe's 81 points, but I think that Kobe had the better game because of the competition he faced, the effort he had to exert, and the pace of the game. So, to start off about the competition, in 1962, Wilt Chamberlain was 7'1 and weighed 275 pounds. That's big nowadays, but back in 1962, that was massive. And he was playing against the New York Knicks, whose tallest player was Darrell Imhoff, and he was 6'10". However, he was a second-year player and only played 20 minutes that game, so the defensive responsibility is going to fall to Cleveland Buckner, who was 6'9", and Willie Knowles, who was 6'6". With Wilt Chamberlain being 3 inches taller than the entire opposition, this created a major mismatch for him and allowed him to effortlessly score. Now, in the 2000s, the NBA was a lot more physical than the 1960s. Kobe Bryant was playing freak athletes who have been training their entire lives to make it to the NBA. And he was also a 6'6 guard and was roughly the same size as most of the Raptors players. This meant there was no mismatch that he could use to his advantage like Chamberlain. And in December, the Raptors actually only allowed Bryant to score 11 points, so he was facing elite defenders that knew what they were doing. So that's pretty much it for the competition. It's pretty clear that Bryant had to face harder competition than Wilt Chamberlain had throughout the game. In the effort, Bryant had to use more energy and effort than Chamberlain throughout the game on both offense and defense. Because Chamberlain was the tallest player on the court and had an 8-foot wingspan, he could easily impact shots by standing near the basket and occasionally jumping, and he could impact layups and mid-range shots easily. Bryant, on the other hand, had to defend against shifty guards, and he had to stay in front of them and switch screens with his teammates. And the Raptors' offense was actually beating the Lakers by 14 points at halftime, so this was a competitive game for 4 quarters. It was not, however, a competitive game for 4 quarters for Wilt Chamberlain. The Philadelphia Warriors, who Chamberlain plays for, was intentionally fouling the New York Knicks in the 4th quarter to stop the clock and get more possessions for Chamberlain. An intentional foul stops the clock, and it's basically when you foul someone on purpose so they can get free throws. And they were just doing this throughout the 4th quarter so that they could get to 100 points for Wilt. And they were already winning in a 169-147 blowout win, so there was really no need to intentionally foul except for get Chamberlain to 100 points. Furthermore, the Knicks were actually intentionally fouling Chamberlain as well, because he was unstoppable down low and was seen as a below average free throw shooter, so the only way they thought they could stop him is by intentionally fouling him. And Chamberlain ended up that game with 32 free throws, which is 12 more than Kobe had, and was quoted calling the 4th quarter a farce because of how many free throws there were. In 2006, Bryant had to earn his free throws with penetration drives and pump fakes. And since there was never close enough in the game for there to be an intentional foul, that didn't happen. And if it was, the Raptors wouldn't intentionally foul Kobe Bryant because he had an 87% free throw percent that season. Bryant had to use his ball dribbling skills to create his own shots. And that's because he was a guard, whereas Wilt Chamberlain was a post player, which means he was fed the ball down low and could get easy layups. Bryant also had to exert more effort on both sides of the ball while scoring in the flow of the game. He wasn't gifted any extra possessions. This brings me to my last point, which is the flow and pace of the game. In 1960, it was very fast compared to the 2000s. In 1962, there was an average of 108 field goal attempts per game compared to an average of 79 field goal attempts per game in 2006. The Philadelphia Warriors actually had 115 field goal attempts that game, and the Los Angeles Lakers only had 88 field goal attempts, which is 27 less. And field goal attempts are basically every shot attempted at the basket, and they're important because the more field goal attempts you have, then the more chances there are for you to shoot the ball. And Chamberlain's stat line in his game was he had 63 field goal attempts, 32 free throw attempts, and played every single minute of the game, which is 48 minutes. The highest field goal attempt in an NBA game since 1983 was 50 field goal attempts by none other than Kobe Bryant. Compared that to Chamberlain's 63 field goal attempts, and you can see that he got a lot of shot attempts that game. Now, Bryant's stat line compared to Chamberlain's stat line is Bryant had 46 field goal attempts compared to Chamberlain's 63. He had 20 free throw attempts compared to Chamberlain's 32 free throw attempts, and played 42 minutes, which means that Bryant had 17 less shots than Chamberlain, 12 less free throws than Chamberlain, and played 6 less minutes that game than Chamberlain. You could see the stats are pretty similar, but if we can adjust the stats for minutes and possessions per game, we can actually mimic the 1962 season. And there's some math formulas you can do to calculate this, but once it's calculated, Bryant's stats come out to 65 field goal attempts compared to Chamberlain's 63 field goal attempts, 28 free throw attempts compared to Chamberlain's 32 free throw attempts, and 114 points, which is 14 higher than what Wilt scored. However, Bryant did get the three-point line in 2006 because it wasn't yet invented in 1962. So if we calculate that and we take away his three-pointers, then he still has 107 points, which is 7 more than what Wilt Chamberlain had. And the three-pointers shouldn't even really matter because Wilt Chamberlain is a center and he wouldn't normally shoot that. And also they're really far, so it's going to be a lot lower shot percentage than a mid-range or a layup. And adjusting the stats is not foolproof, and it could be seen as a cheap way of looking at the game, but the amount of field goal attempts in 1960 cannot be understated. So, in conclusion, both Kobe Bryant and Wilt Chamberlain had outstanding careers and changed the game of basketball forever. They're both legends and Hall of Famers, and it's really hard to compare two games that happened 44 years apart, especially considering that Wilt Chamberlain's game actually had no footage, and the only thing we have is eyewitness reports of that game. But with all that being said, I think that Kobe Bryant slightly edges out Wilt Chamberlain for having the best individual performance in an NBA basketball game ever. Thank you.